For those who just joined, we're just giving it a little bit of time for everyone to get online before we jump in. Okay. So we still are having some people come on board, but we will start off and give a little bit of an intro and then jump into all of the exciting content we have for you. First introduction for myself. I'm Joanna Phillips from ESOP Builders. I work with Perry Phillips here. And we have Dean Ell as well on the call as a guest speaker. Thank you, Dean, for joining. And good afternoon, everyone who's listening in or sharing their screen right now with me. I'm sure many of you are now familiar with Zoom, but I will go through some of the controls I just want you to be aware of here. So for those of you on computer, we have the Q&A and the chats open, as well as the raise your hand function should be there too. So these are the main ones that I want to just keep you aware of. If you can ask your questions using the Q&A, you can also upvote. So if you see a question there that you also have, you can upvote that one. And we'll try and monitor these as we go through the webinar. If we're not able to get to all the questions during this hour, then we'll try to record the transcript and have the answers for you as the attendees afterwards. And I am gonna just go off on my video, but I wanted to introduce myself first and have you able to see the video. So today we do have some really great content to bring to all of you. Myself and Perry, as I said, from ESOP Builders, will be taking you through the webinar today, and we're definitely pleased to have Dean Ell as a guest from iQmetrix. I do want to also mention that ESOP Builders has recently conducted a survey of Canadian ESOP companies just to gain insight into what they're doing, strategies they're taking into consideration, how they're reacting and planning around the crisis right now. Definitely a big thank you to the ESOP Association Canada for assisting in gathering these responses. And we'll definitely be touching on some of the trends from this survey throughout the webinar in hopes that, you know, it adds some perspective and maybe even gives you some great ideas to take away. It is worth a note just at this point that the survey was completed April 13th. So as we know, the situation is rapidly changing, evolving, and things are happening at a very quick speed. So some details may not be applying as much now, but we think that the overarching trends are still very relevant. We've planned this hour for you in order to share experiences, both through the survey data as well as having brief discussions during the question and answer periods as we go through the webinar with you. There can definitely be comfort in uncertain times knowing that many others are really in the same situation, have the same questions that we have. And so hopefully some of today will focus on being inspiration for solutions to some of those questions. Again, with such a rapidly changing environment, ESOP Builders is also constantly learning, and Perry and I are learning as much as we can as we go through the different challenges, and we hope to keep sharing what we learn with the ESOP community moving forward. We'll flow through 6 sections today, with Perry starting us off in company in valuations, and he'll also talk to considerations in your plan and modifications that you might want to think about. Near the end of today's session, we'll get more into the cultural aspect, communication strategies, and looking at lifting morale and keeping the engagement within your employee group and your company. Perry, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. So we're going to talk about valuations, the impact on valuations. And last week, I attended a webinar. It was put on by 5 associations, 3 from the United States, 1 from Canada, and 1 from the UK. And so they talked about the valuation issues in regard to the crisis in their various countries. And the consensus seemed to be that there was going to be a discount of at least 10 to 15% because of the virus, just from the virus, actually. And I guess if we look at the stock markets around the world, you can see that discount being applied probably even to a greater extent. And the other issue that came out is the date of the valuation is very critical. So if a lot of people have valuations at the end of December, the valuator wouldn't be able to complete their valuations until usually around March. And because of that, and you know, the virus itself hadn't really taken hold in terms of the world economies until March. So it may not have been factored into that December 31st valuation. So there was a lot of discussion, and there was no consensus really on how much you should take that into consideration. It's going to pretty much be left up to the evaluator. One of the things that I find as a evaluator, of course, when you're doing the valuation is normalization of earnings. So if your year ends with December 31st, you might have a great year last year. 2019 would have been a great year. And then 2020 hits in the first quarter, and all of a sudden, nothing's happening, right? So that's obviously going to impact. And so normalization of earnings is going to be a big factor in doing any valuations. The other thing that's going to be very important, more so than in most years, is forecasts, because we're going to have to get back to identifying when a normal year is going to occur. So if it's not going to be 2020, is it going to be 2021? And what impact is that going to be on the company? So forecasts are going to be very, very critical and going to be looked at closely at valuators. So one other aspect to look at, of course, is do you consider the COVID-19 year or not? So, you know, it's always been my philosophy that unusual years, whether good or bad, should be looked at very closely. This is obviously, you know, if you look at it, this pandemic, the last time a pandemic of this magnitude occurred was 100 years ago, right? During the Spanish flu. So obviously, thank God this is not going to be a recurring event. And, you know, should you even take this year into account at all, right? So that's something you have to talk to your evaluator about if there's any impact at all. One thing we look at as evaluators, of course, as a component of risk is the strength of your balance sheet. And I believe that your balance sheet, the people, companies with very strong balance sheets are going to have higher values than they may have had in the past, because it's the companies that have that strong balance sheet are going to be able to survive and then come out of this very, very strong and moving forward at a high pace. So balance sheets, how strong your balance sheet is at any point in time is going to take on a critical factor with your evaluator. And then finally, should people be doing interim valuations? So we had a lot of questions on our survey, which we're going to go over. But I would only say that the valuation every year is really the board of directors' responsibility. The board of directors can hire a evaluator, as many do, but that's just one aspect. They take that into consideration, and then they decide what the valuation is. But it's the board of directors' responsibility. So we've always taken the position that if something of a crisis, of a major material crisis like this virus occurs, that an interim evaluation would be valid just because, for example, the 2019 year is no longer applicable to the 2020 year. And therefore an interim evaluation may be necessary. So the pros are, of course, that it brings the valuation more in line with the reality of the situation on the ground for your company. And the cons are, of course, you're going to have to communicate that with your employees so that they understand that through no fault of their own or the company, that this is a necessity to do an interim valuation. So next slide. Next slide, please, Joanna. Yep. Okay, so this was from our survey. And what was the perceived impact from the virus? So I guess the majority, around 45% of the companies responding, didn't know. So they don't know what, so that's great uncertainty. Then 10% value probably reduced, another 30%. So 40% of the respondents felt that there would be a reduction in value. And then 20% felt that there would be a net zero effect or no impact on value. So depending upon what you'll see, how people are doing, there are winners and losers in this new economy that we're looking at. And some people are doing well and other people aren't doing so well. So, so that was what we saw from our data. Next slide, please. So in terms of valuation, what were companies doing in terms of the valuation of their companies? So discounting the value next year. So for almost 45% felt that next year there would be a discount applied to their company. Around 20% were going to take a proactive solution to maintain value. So they were putting into action skills and experiences that would increase their EBITDA, cost control, and to maintain the profitability of the company. About 20% felt that the impact would be unknown at this time. It was too soon for them to tell in terms of the valuation. Then you have the philosophical position that it is what it is, and no answer, not applicable, not sure. So there's there's still a lot of people that don't know what the impact is going to be because they don't know what the 2020 year is going to look like. It depends on how soon the economy starts to open up, how soon the world economy start opening up, and how soon the world starts getting back to business. Now, interesting, I found it very interesting. So only 5% were conducting interim valuations. I would have thought it'd be much higher than that. It may be because there's so much uncertainty, and it's only, if your year end was December 31st, and we're just out of the first quarter now. Considering conducting an interim valuation, another 5%, so not a lot of people looking at that. And then in terms of discounting current value, so if you had a valuation done recently, nobody was looking at discounting that value. Although as I mentioned before, it was a consensus that there probably was at least a 10 to 15% discount applied because of that, because of the virus. Okay, next slide.
So we do have a couple questions, and Perry, I'll pose them to you, and some of them we may actually address a little later on, but I'll leave that to you. So first one is more of a comment, I guess, for your response. It's hard to ask employees to buy shares at last year's price when everyone knows that the value of the company has declined. And how would you respond to that?
I would put myself in their shoes and I would say, yeah, you know, there's no question we know there's been a decline. The question is the decline permanent? So you'd have to look at your balance sheet. Do you have a strong balance sheet? Do you, so I would suggest that really where you're going with that question is, should we be deferring the offering this year because we don't know what that year's going to look like? And so that gets into the other question of do we defer or not, which we're going to talk to in a minute.
Right. So that was the other question is, should we consider putting any sell or purchase transactions on hold? So we will get into that in the next couple of slides.
Right. Okay, so we're going to look at some potential modifications to your plan. We're going to talk about share offering, funding, and buybacks. So let's start with the share offering. Well, it leads in well from the last question in the valuation, so that's good. So on the left, you'll see the results of our survey. So 30% have not made any changes to the annual ESOP offering. So it looked like at least a week ago that people were looking at continuing to move forward with their share offering. 25% have already deferred their share offering. So 1 in 4 have deferred it. 1 in 4, 25% are undecided about whether to make a change or not. And then 5% have already offered shares in 2020. So that's really interesting, I think, and that's reflective of the people who responded to our interview. And you can take that. Obviously, it's very specific to your company. And again, you're going to see as we go through this that there's been a lot of different responses depending upon how strong your company is and where you sit on terms of the plus or negative side of the business ratio. So some of the things that we would offer to you are think of deferring the offering on the basis that, and again, this is always done in full communication. We're going to go over morale and communication, which is really critical in terms of making any decision points within an ESOP company and within an ESOP culture. So if you're thinking of deferring an offering, make sure that there's buy-in from your employees and the reasoning for doing that, okay? All plans have, that we put into place in any event, all plans that we put into place have the ability to defer offerings. You're not required to do an offering each year, even if that was the plan. It's up to the board of directors if you want to make an offering this year. It doesn't mean that you're stopping the plan, it just means that you're deferring it. You may want to, if you're going to go forward, you may want to change the minimum purchase. So many plans have a minimum purchase, maybe $1,500, $2,000, $2,500 per person. And you may want to reduce that to maybe $500 or $600 so that people can still participate if you want to go forward with your offering. And then keep the offering. So if you're going to keep the offering, maybe you want to allow funding that is more flexible. We're going to talk in more detail about that if you want to go forward. So defer, change the minimum purchase, and then we're going to talk about funding. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can increase the flexibility by adding more options. So let's say right now you're doing a cash or a payroll deduction. You may want to add different options to doing it. You may, if you're offering payroll deductions at this point, you may want to defer payroll deductions or extend them. So if the payroll deduction was for a year, maybe what you want to do this year in your offering is maybe offer it over a 3-year time frame. So instead of deducting, a couple $100 a month over 12 years, you'd cut that down to $30 a month and make it over 3 years, right? So extend your payroll deductions. In terms of other things you can look at are pre-tax bonusing if you're not doing that now. dividends or freeze. So I'm going to talk to those issues. Distributing dividends instead of salaries are interesting in the sense that dividends are basically for companies that aren't making any money. It doesn't really, so paying a salary and you're not making any money, the expense won't be picked, you won't get a tax deduction on it. But a dividend, of course, you can't write off against your income, but a dividend is a benefit to your employees because it's at a lower tax rate than their income tax. So you might combine, let's say, part of the salaries with dividends. You may also look at loans. If the company, again, has a strong balance sheet and is able to loan that money to the employees, let's say some companies have large amounts of cash or redundant assets on the balance sheet, you may be able to use that money to loan it to the employees. They then buy the shares. Maybe they buy back treasury shares, so the money comes back to the company, and that way the employees are still holding shares and have a loan going into the future. So that's let's go to the next slide. Okay, so pre-tax bonusing. If you're not doing it and you want to set it up, it has to be done in a very specific way so you don't contravene CRA issues in regard to salary deferral schemes. The shares are going to be issued from Treasury. That's where they have to come from. The bonus dollar amount, generally, you have to make it that it's not known. So for example, if you have a bonus and you declare it as $10,000, and the employee says, well, don't give me the $10,000, I'll take it in shares. Revenue doesn't like that. To them, that's a salary deferral scheme. So you have to keep that bonus amount unknown to be on site. And at least, and it should never be used by itself. So it should be used in conjunction with other methodologies of funding, such as cash or payroll deduction, so that people continue to have skin in the game. The benefit, obviously, to the employee is that it's pre-tax. So they're not going to pay 30, 40% on that bonus, and therefore can obtain the shares, can obtain more shares than they would if they tried to pay out of their after-tax income. Okay, next slide. So one of the things you may want to think about, so even if your ESOP is up and running at this point, and you have a whole bunch of ESOP owners, including the founding owners, what you might want to do is freeze the value of the company. And what that would allow is that, especially in cases where, and we're going to talk to about liquidity, it would basically give back to all employees preferred shares. It could be with a dividend or not. It could be a cumulative dividend or not. So they would take back the value of preferred shares, and then over time, those preferred shares, when things are better, could be redeemed by the company, and the employees would be able to get their money out that way. But they would continue, because if you do a full freeze, they would then be able to buy back common shares at nominal values, and therefore hold common shares for future value growth. So basically, preferred shares are fixed in value; they never go up. That's why it's called a freeze. And they would hold those shares. It's basically a loan from the company to the employees. It's basically a loan from the employees to the company. And that would be paid over time as the company is in a position to do so. But as the company recovers and grows in value, that value growth applies to the common shares, which they would then participate in, because they would have nominal value. So freeze has can be used in many circumstances here to make ESOPs get over this virus and continue to keep their employees in place. Funding mechanisms, of course, any kind of funding mechanism has to be reviewed with your legal and tax advisor to make sure that it can work within your organization. Okay, next slide. Okay, so buyback. Uh, the trigger events in most ESOP companies are when a person leaves or is terminated, or so there's a death, disability, and the company buys back the shares directly or through a third party when the employees leave for different reasons. And so one of the things to be aware of that uh, be aware of what they are in case they're needed. So your shareholders agreement will define what the payout terms are. Now, if you have layoffs, so you intend to call people back, generally it's not a trigger event, depending on the length of the layoff and the statutory notice period in your province or territory. So each province and territory has different statutory definitions of layoff periods. So you would have to check that. But generally, it's not a trigger event under your agreement. However, if some people are not going to be called back, and then it becomes a permanent termination, then under the agreement, there is a buyout provision. One of our philosophies has always been, over the last 20 years, is that whenever an ESOP is put into place, the philosophy is that you take care of the people that are staying and you be fair to the people that are leaving. And we build into the plan that concept so that if there is a crisis or that there's a fail-safe clause that basically says that if there's a large amount of people leaving, that would cause, or a large payout, that would cause distress to the company going forward, either because their banking ratios would be out of line, or it would cause insolvency to the company, that those payouts can be deferred for up to 10 years in terms of paying off that amount. So it's a crisis clause, and it allows the board of directors to protect the company and to protect the people that are staying. And I think that's a critical position point to take. It's also, again, you have to define whether these are temporary layoffs or permanent layoffs. Okay, next slide. Okay, questions, please.
Yes, so we do have some here, and advice for employees looking to sell back shares. So for whatever reason, maybe there are employees who are in, dire situations. What is your advice outside of these trigger events? Is there opportunity for employees to sell back shares?
So the opportunities within the ESOP are that you could set up a mini market to see if people were willing to buy those shares. Maybe you discount them so that the people buying those shares will pick up a benefit. But at least that person who needs that money will be able to get it tax-free. So that there may be some interest. There may be people that would be prepared to buy shares at a discount. Another thing you could do is if the company is in a position, you could loan that person money with the shares as collateral, so they don't have to sell the shares, but they can obtain the loan from the company and pay it back when things get better. And their collateral for that loan would be the shares. Another thing you could do is you could have the employee, as I said, we talked about the freeze, and have the person change them into preferred shares and pay dividends on the shares to flow some cash into that person's hands. For people that are in dire circumstances, that haven't been able, and we're going to talk about the government programs in place at this point in time, that people have that haven't been able maybe to access those, then I think you may go to the point where you have to where the company may actually buy them back. That unfortunately is not the most beneficial tax treatment to that employee because it's a deemed dividend. If you have set up a BICO or a trust co to buy those shares, then that buyback would be tax-free to the employee. So I think I think you have to set up a program in your company on an individual basis and have people come in individually and lay out their circumstances to you, and the company will have to adapt where they think the greatest need is, and within the concept of course, you got to protect the company going forward. There's probably no easy answers on this one. We're just going to try to help each other as best we can. And as I say, those are the kind of ways that I would think you could do it without triggering the buyback provision.
Okay, thank you, Perry. And Dean, I'll pass it along to you to talk about your role in your company and what iQmetrix has been doing.
All right, good afternoon to all, and thank you, Perry and Joanna, for the invitation. Just going to give you a little bit of a story here about iQmetrix and our pandemic response. So a little bit about me. I'm the controller at iQmetrix. I've been with the company for about 18 years, and I've had the good fortune of working in two different ESOP companies. Probably got about 25 years experience between the two. And on top of that, I'm also the current chair of the ESOP Association of Canada. So a little bit about iQmetrix. We're a software company, and we're very proud that we have over 20,000 wireless retail locations or stores using our software in North America. So companies that sell cell phones, about 20,000 of them using our software to run their day-to-day business. Over the past couple of years, we branched out, kind of pivoted a little bit, and we've put some focus towards becoming an incubator company where we take a new business idea, and we take that idea to a certain point, and then we kind of spin off that, you could call it division, I guess, into a new company with the intention of selling that company one day. And our first incubated company built and sells custom software to cannabis retailers. So stores selling cannabis in North America. And so iQmetrix still owns the majority of this company. However, we brought in investors to help fund growth and take the company to the next level, and then ultimately sell it one day. And we have another incubated business that we're working on that we may spin off later this year. And I can tell you that these incubated companies have generated some real interesting ESOP issues for us, but that's a story for another day. So we currently have about 430 employees. We're spread out. We're in Regina, Winnipeg, and Vancouver with offices in those two cities, as well as we're in Denver, Colorado, and Charlotte, North Carolina. We rolled out our ESOP back in 2008, and I have been the ESOP Administrator since inception. Next, I'm just going to tell you a little story about how iQmetrix has responded over the past 6 or so weeks in terms of the pandemic. And the first thing that happened was we created a pandemic response team and a pandemic response team who moved quickly. And we actually closed our offices probably a week before most of Canada closed down. We've been very fortunate. We were very fortunate that every employee already worked off of laptops, and we had the infrastructure for remote access in place. So working from home really wasn't a stretch for us. Zoom, that was a staple of us, for us pre-pandemic. And, having offices spread across several cities, we were well versed in Zoom. So that was an advantage to us. Another tool we had been using for some time pre-pandemic is Microsoft Slack. And if you're not familiar with Slack, it's an online chat tool. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. iQmetrix has been all over the map. When you talk about work from home over the years, we had a work from home policy several years ago, and then we decided to backtrack and say, no longer working from home except under certain circumstances. And then just prior to the pandemic, we introduced our newest, most recent work from home policy. And now each team is responsible to figure out how they want to make use of work from home. And little did we know that, that every one of us would be working from home now. So iQmetrix has been somewhat fortunate in that, most of our customers, the cell phone retailers, have been deemed an essential service in many provinces and states. However, we have seen a large number of customers voluntarily close down. So, we've definitely seeing a decline in revenue. Our pandemic response team has done a great job, though, in communicating throughout this event. They gave us the heads up that the offices were closing. They've done a great job of communicating with employees via email and Slack, since the offices have closed. And even, while we're doing this work from home, we still continue to have company-wide staff meetings. And just to, show you the power of Zoom, we've had over 400 employees on with full video sessions running in Zoom, and it didn't crash. So it's been very solid for us. I mentioned, Zoom, where we had 400 people. I mentioned Slack earlier, and it's really an amazing tool, and it's really helped us evolve the community side of iQmetrix. We have dozens and dozens of Slack channels or chat pages that we've created, or that have helped us create this online community. We have specific team channels and specific project channels. There, we have pandemic related channels where people post all sorts of information and share opinions, and some of these channels are company wide, and others are more specific to each office or team. And then we have tons of personal channels where people with like interests such as foodies or astronomy, sports, special interests, mental health. It's just dozens and dozens of channels, and it's really helped bring us together. We're spread out over several offices. It gives us an outlet and a tool to help keep everybody connected. It's a place to vent in some cases or share opinions on a variety of topics. And it's amazing to see how the IQ community interacts. Just as an example, the mental health Slack channel, there are people posting on a regular basis, just sharing interesting reads, tips and tricks, kudos, etc. And employees sharing what works for them, what doesn't work for them. Again, expert postings, and it's just very inspiring to read this information and these postings. And we've been fortunate up to this point at iQmetrix. We haven't laid anybody off, but communications have been shared, stating possible scenarios if things did get more difficult for us. And I'm really proud to see this type of communication. It's showing a real maturity within the organization. And if something serious does happen, some very serious decisions are made, employees won't be blindsided. They'll have seen it coming, and hopefully we don't get to that point. Internally, the pandemic has impacted us in many ways, and in some cases we're finding some teams or team members that have unexpected capacity. The way we do business has changed, and so we're working with those teams or with those individuals to redeploy this capacity elsewhere within the organization. And we're starting to see that happen just over the last couple of weeks. We've created a task force that's been deployed to determine, which relief programs we qualify for in both Canada, US, or at the state and provincial levels. And this task force is also responsible for applying and registering for these programs. So all in, having been with the organization for about 18 years, I'm very impressed with how iQmetrix has responded. I'm just going to take a couple of seconds and put on my other hat here. And that being the chair of the ESOP Association. It's amazing. It's an amazing association. And, our main event that we put on is an annual ESOP conference, and it was scheduled for June 2020 here in Regina. We've postponed that conference, pushed it out to June 2021, and it'll be in Regina, and it would be amazing to see a lot of the people that are on this call today at the conference. There's something there for everyone at our annual ESOP conference. Are you thinking about an ESOP? Are you currently launching an ESOP, or a young ESOP? Maybe you're an established ESOP. There are all sorts of experts and service providers in attendance, and some truly amazing people, and the networking opportunities are amazing. Our membership committee is helping take this association to the next level. Today we have a free membership, and we're looking at launching a new paid membership model, hopefully this summer. We'll be able to share some more details with you about that in the future. And just a note, if you're interested in supporting the ESOP Association as potentially a board member, a board advisory member, maybe helping on a committee, please reach out to us. You can find our contact information on our website, www.esopcanada.com. And just want to say, hey, thank you for joining us today. And are there any questions for me at this point?
Thank you, Dean. Yeah, any questions are welcome for Dean. But really, I appreciate the story. I think it is helpful as we talk about what others are doing. We can kind of share the successes and share our stories from that perspective. Our next section, I think you've provided a good kind of transition to what we're talking about next, which is the morale and communication, keeping your employees engaged and productive in a really 180 scenario for a lot of people. Dean, do you have any thoughts to productivity drops with sudden remote employees?
I can't speak to the entire organization. The finance team, it's such cyclical work that we do. We've got our month-end closes where we just went through year-end. We're just kind of wrapping up our audit. Our audit this year was done 100% remotely. It was a little different from how we normally do things, but not a huge stretch. So within finance, again, just because of the cyclical nature, and we have all these deadlines, we know that people are getting their work done because we're meeting our goals consistently so far. I mean, it's still very early. Again, I can't really speak to what's going on in the rest of the organization, other than when teams reach out and say that they have some capacity, and do you have any projects or anything where you need help, and you've got individuals asking, is there something, is there another area where they could provide some assistance? They don't have a lot on their plate. Those are the things that are happening. Sorry, I don't have any more information than that at this point.
All right, thanks, Dean. And I think you were sharing the ESOP Association's website. It's .ca at the end, right?
Yes, sorry.
No problem. Gosh, that comment. So thank you for those participating, and thank you for the questions. And like I said, our next section, going into the more cultural side of a lot of questions we got through our survey, as well as through clients and through other external sources, is how to keep that productivity going, how to make sure, how do you know how your employees are doing from, just a personal side, a mental state side, and a productivity and engagement side of things. And I'd like to start that off with another story. regarding participative management. And this can be in an ESOP context or otherwise, but really it's talking about how you are collaborating and involving your employees in making company decisions. And Perry is going to talk about a US ESOP company.
Right. Thank you, Dean. That was great. You have a great company. I've known you a long time, and you're heading up a great association. You're doing great work, and I intend to see you in Regina in 2021. Yeah. So this is an example. This was a company in the U.S., a trucking company. It was about 400 people, and it was a very severe downturn. And what happened, so culturally, what they did is they decided we're going to have to lay a lot of people off. They got together, set up committees, and it was the people themselves, the employees themselves, that decided who could be laid off. Because, you know, like someone with seniority might have been financially secure, and let's say their family had left, and you know, they were an empty nester. Whereas, let's say someone else, another employee, had just started a family or had 2 kids and was not financially secure. So they made decisions within their organization that was a consensus of the employee group. And they laid off a whole bunch of employees based on that consensus. Within 6 months, they were able to hire back 95% of the company, and it became a very successful company. So culturally, they used the culture of the ESOP to get buy-in in terms of who they should let go within the company, and it was accepted by all the employees. So that's an example of participative management.
Thank you. I really do think it's great to hear those kinds of stories and keep the positivity, knowing that there are positive situations that come out of these challenging times. So recently, I was able to attend a webinar put on by the Beyster Institute, which is a US organization that communicates and educates on ESOPs in the US. And there were experts there from the US ESOP Association, as well as the NCEO, National Center of Employee Ownership, talking about the most effective strategies for communication in a crisis, so specifically in a situation like this one. It is hard in times like these to know kind of what to communicate or what not to communicate. Basically, if you were taking anything out of this slide, is the actions and the responses to questions during the crisis will likely have a lasting impact on your employees' trust in the leadership and their confidence in the leadership of the company long past the crisis is behind us. So not wanting to create another challenge that we have to overcome after the crisis is gone, have that effective communication now and understand what is going to be effective. It's hard to over communicate in a time like this, but you can overwhelm people. And so making a plan for your communication, having it in little bites at a time, being direct, and keeping it simple, keeping it easy to understand and digest is going to help in that retention and make sure that it's not overwhelming to people and to your employees. Keeping channels for communication open, using programs that maybe you already have in your company, like an employee assistance program. Maybe it hasn't been communicated recently, but using this opportunity to re-communicate things that you already have in your company that can be helpful. As Dean was mentioning, you know, he has a task force. There's been delegation of responsibilities to different groups of employees, using those committees that you have established or those task forces and putting the responsibilities in their hands on responding to certain aspects of the crisis and how your company is going to plan around that. And this is also a way to engage your employee owners, right? And in acting in the best interests of the company and trying to make decisions that way. Focusing, definitely a big one, is focusing on the opportunities and things that you can control, rather than focusing on, you know, what can't be controlled. It's easy to get into that mindset of focusing on all the uncertainties, because you're trying to plan, you're trying to strategize, but there's so many things you don't know. And so it's easy to kind of get stuck in there, but also be aware to focus on what opportunities there are and what you can control. Also knowing your audience, I think this is a known communication best practice, but not using, you know, extensive jargon and things that not everyone might know. So in contrast to this, this list, through our Canadian survey, we also found a lot of similarities in what companies are saying that they're doing, how they're responding, how they're engaging employees, and the decisions that they're making. So having these task forces and delegating responsibilities throughout different groups in the organization, having brainstorming sessions with employees, and internal surveys or one-on-one conversations. The communication, based on our survey, what we saw was that many people were saying communication needs to be frequent, consistent, realistic, but also positive. And a lot of alignment in what the values of the company are. So again, using the opportunity to re-communicate your company values and aligning that with your crisis response plan is going to keep your employees' mindset positive, and also their trust and confidence that the company is going to get through this. Lastly, you know, an example of offering choices to employees. A company may decide before declaring a layoff is to actually ask employees if there's any volunteers, and you might be surprised at the response in some cases. So while we're all thinking of how we can continue our operations, how we can try and get out of this in a strong position, sometimes it is important to take a step back. And this topic is more along the sides of discussed a lot in the HR community right now, in the mental health in the workplace community, but understanding that there are personal mental impacts that challenging and stressful situations have on individuals. Trauma, the crisis can be taken as a traumatic event that everyone is going through and experiencing right now. And your body actually tries to protect you as you're going through this event so that you can actually get through it and you're not going to completely break down. And so your brain will reduce to a certain capacity, to a certain degree. And that can actually make individuals feel demotivated or feel maybe a bit numb, and you might actually feel like you're doing fine, and that's your body protecting you so that you can get through a time of great uncertainty and a time of a lot of challenges. So it is important to be aware of this, both from, you know, a person who's leading an organization as well as just an individual or an employee. If you are a leader within the organization, understanding that your employees are going through this, and that there are ways to counteract those effects, because you want to be able to have your employees continue to work, continue to be productive, and have that positive mindset so that they can do so. Definitely there's benefits of non-work interactions and activities. So Dean's kind of touched on some of those things and really awesome stories that he has within his organization. And we'll talk about them a little bit more in the next slide. But definitely managing expectations as well, in terms of when your new processes are coming online so quickly that you have to learn, while you're also trying to adapt to so many other things at once. That creates a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. And you can't, as an individual, have the same expectations of yourself that you had before this kind of situation came into your life. And so realizing that your expectations do need to align with reality in order to allow you to be productive, be engaged, and motivated. So the closer your expectations can align with reality, the happier you'll be as an individual, the better state your mental health will be in, and the better position you'll be in to put the work in that you need to, both in your personal life and in your work life. And so obviously for us as leaders of our companies, we want to make sure that our employees are in that good state, that they can offer that for us. And this is not to be mistaken for lack of effort, right? So effort has to be there along with the realistic expectations. A good tool to keep in mind is just realizing small accomplishments. So something that you might have not even thought of pre-crisis could be actually an accomplishment. Something like eating breakfast. That's an individual kind of accomplishment, but it can start you off really well for your day. And also within your company, there can be small accomplishments. Maybe there's a new process that you had to quickly implement and it hasn't really been going that great. And one day you get it 100% and everything goes smoothly. And that's a great accomplishment. Maybe it is a simple process, but because you had to get to it so quickly, it's a really great accomplishment in this time. And I just wanted to share from a cultural standpoint, like these are comments, examples that we got from our survey and from ESOP companies now what they're doing. There's a tree service company who asked their staff to try to identify tree disease, take pictures of that, obviously, where they live, close to their home, take pictures, share in their group chat, whatever tool they were using, and have a discussion there, have engaged conversations going. And so this doesn't, it's related to work, but it has an aspect of fun to it. It keeps that conversation and social connection going without being socially close to someone. And also a lot of companies utilizing current tools that they have, their company intranet, for example, and a company who might be going completely from an office environment to a 180 and they're all virtual. That's a huge change and a huge switch. And so using the intranet to, post pictures and share how different people are setting up their home workstations, and sharing, fun activities that they might be doing in that respect to stay motivated and stay productive. And this is going to obviously really tie into what your culture has already been like. There's companies who already do all this stuff and then they just switch it to virtual. Like Dean's company, they were already using Slack, I believe. They were using Zoom. But Slack is a great one. You have those different channels. Some channels will be work-related stuff. Some channels will be non-work related and just interest-based. And it creates that social community in this time of really stressful situations. So your employees will appreciate that. Programs helping communities is also a way to keep up that positive mindset. And your employees who might not feel like they can control much, this is something that they could control. So an example of this was highlighted in NCO's blog recently. King Arthur Flour, a company in the US, they launched a program called Goodness Bakes. And basically they direct tens of thousands of dollars to purchase baked goods from their customers that are then distributed to like food banks, shelters, homeless shelters, and organizations that help unemployed, things like that. And so that allows the organization's employees to actually be feeling like there is something that they can control. Okay, so we'll kind of continue to move forward. And after the next section, we'll have kind of a final question period where I can touch on any last questions that we might have. And I'm going to move forward to our government programs. we just wanted to list out for those who may have not had a chance to really look into it a lot. We will provide the link there as a resource, which takes you to a page with further details on each of these programs. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but I did want to highlight number 2 on this list, which I think a lot of companies are looking at. And we've been waiting for an application process to be open. And so that's actually set to be open through the CRA on Monday, April 27th. So that's coming up this Monday. I wanted to make sure you had the update if you haven't received that already. For those of you who are experiencing, negative impacts, those would definitely be good to try and participate in if you can. So any last questions we have at this point? We're about to wrap up, but I just wanted to check in with our attendees here. Okay, we look okay. If you do have further questions that you think of, you can definitely email info@esopbuilders.com and we'll make ourselves available as much as we can. If you would like a copy of the presentation deck, just let us know. Again, the same email address. You can email to let us know that you would like a copy of that. You would receive some information as an attendee of this webinar, so I'll get to that in a moment. But I did want to see if you have the opportunity to use your raise hand tool. As we learn of things, would it be of interest to you to have for future sessions like this? Webinars, online resources, blogs, videos, what have you, as well as virtual forums, chats, and discussion place where you could have discussion. So thank you for those who are raising your hand. For further details about these types of tools, make sure that you are included on our email database so that you get the updates, as well as Twitter and LinkedIn. We post updates there as well if those are platforms that you frequent. And again, thank you for those who have raised your hand. So that does bring us to the end of our session today. You would likely be redirected to a feedback survey. And we would really appreciate if there's any comments, any feedback you have for us to improve these types of sessions. We would definitely appreciate that. Again, our info is up there in terms of the email that you can email to if you would like to receive the deck. You would receive, as an attendee of this webinar, the recording as well as an ebook, The 8 Ways to Reinvent Yourself. Basically, it's a summary of 8 case studies of how these entrepreneurs and business owners pivoted, their goals and their business operations to get over a crisis situation. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation, your questions, and your attendance. We do really appreciate it, and we hope you stay safe, continue the positive mindset. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great weekend.
Were there any last questions, Joanna?
There was just one about the presentation. I'm just going to let everyone sign off, and then I can close off with you, Perry and Dean, or Dean, if you need to head off, that's fine.
Yeah, I got a couple of minutes yet, I think.
Are people going to receive the slide deck?
So that's if they would like, they can email our email address that was up there.